been using the iPhone SE for 2 weeks now, and I'm coming back to iOS after a couple of months on Android, the last Android phone being the OnePlus Nord, the direct rival of this phone, I think, in a lot of ways. So there's a lot to talk about this phone, and there's a lot I wanted to cover that I don't think is appropriate to put in a full review. So what I'm going to do is give you guys a 2-week update on how this is. So let me break it down into 2 very simple parts: things I like about the phone and things I don't. Starting off with the things I like about this phone. There's a lot of complaints about the smaller design and how it's an old design, but I think one thing that people are overlooking very easily is how comfortable the size of this phone is. Single-handed use is just like a pleasure on this phone, and it just makes life so much easier. And because of its size, I've actually gone back to using my phone single-handed a lot more. I even type now single-handed most of the time instead of using 2 hands, and it is so much more convenient and comfortable just when you're doing quick things. You don't have to tie up both your hands with the phone. I think that's a fantastic thing that people are overlooking, which really does help this phone, and that's why I think a lot of fans are still rallying behind this older design, even though it is clearly outdated. Again, that smaller size also benefits to you being able to put that thing in your pocket so much more easier. It goes into bags, nooks, crannies, places where you want to store the phone so much more easily. It just feels a lot nicer all around because of its size. If the display was larger, I think this size would have just been a lot more perfect. The Taptic engine, so the vibration motors on Apple phones have just been awesome all throughout, and Android phones have improved greatly, but I think that the Nord was a little bit on the weaker side, and the iPhone SE, just the Taptic motors on this phone is perfect. Like, immediately when I started using it and started feeling those vibrations, it felt so different. It didn't feel like it improved the experience. It wasn't just vibrations to give you feedback. It was like a part of the experience. I don't know how to explain it very clearly, but it was fantastic, and I think that that's a very underrated part of these new Apple phones. This vibration feedback is just fantastic. Another small little detail I noticed is that most Android phones have their volume buttons as one long button that's kind of like a rocker panel that goes, like kind of flexes like that. And while I think that's fine, not the world's biggest deal, having separated buttons I've learned is actually so much better. It's just so much more convenient. You know what you're clicking. The feedback is so much better as well. And it's a very minor detail here, but I really like these separated volume buttons, and I hope more brands do that. I don't know why that's not really a trend, but I guess it is what it is. I do really like that. Just the feedback of this, the buttons are so much better when you have dedicated buttons. Speaking about experiences, just the feedback of everything on this phone, like the apps, the way they run, the way they're designed, it's so much better. App experiences on iPhone are still far and ahead Android phones, and I really think that you can't compare these two. Like, developers clearly are investing more into iOS apps because they look better, they feel better, they just operate more smoothly, and I've honestly have yet to find a single app that I prefer on Android than I do on iOS. Just that the experiences on the apps comparatively are so much better. Even on a lot of Google apps, weirdly, the iOS app is just a little bit more optimized, refined. The feature sets are a little bit different. It's crazy to me, but it's very clear that app experience wise, if you want the best, you have to stick to iOS, and the iPhone SE delivers on that. Even though it's an older design, the app experiences are still just as buttery smooth and perfect. So talking about battery life, this is a very controversial topic with this phone personally for me, because this battery size is really small. When I had the iPhone 6 back in the day, I hated it because of its horrible battery life. And this phone, while it's much better than the iPhone 6 of the past, it's still, the battery is not that good. But the advantage here that I did see was that it charges faster, number one, and the second thing is that it's not as bad as I was expecting. It's bad, but it's not as bad as I was expecting. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Another thing that just kind of plays into this phone being more comfortable because of its size is when you're talking on the phone, when you have the phone up to your ear, it's just so much more comfortable to have that thing up to your ear for long periods of time. Whereas with these other phones, really, after 5 minutes of holding it up to your ear, you need to grab earphones or something because they're just not as comfortable to hold up to your ears. The size of them make them impractical to actually be used for phone calls long term, weirdly enough. And it's just something that I noticed after a couple of days of usage, and I realized, man, I actually don't switch over to my headphones as quickly as I used to, because just the comfortable size of this phone helps me hold it to my face without feeling fatigued. So another thing that I did notice, you know, Android versus iOS, the thing is, while this has, you know, it doesn't have as many gestures with swipe because it's still using the button-based system, the gestures and everything on iPhone just work a lot more smoothly, especially the go back. Like when you swipe on a page to go back, that motion is still a lot more fluid on the iPhone than it is on Android phones. I think that they still need to improve on that a little bit. It's definitely a software thing, right? It can be very easily improved. I'm just hoping that they pick it up quickly. But with the iPhone SE, that's something I did notice right off the bat. Another thing with that button, you have Touch ID implemented right in. So in the age of masks, I think it's a fantastic thing to have. But also at the same time, I do miss Face ID, because the authentication, especially for, you know, apps that use Face ID, they're just so much easier. You don't have to place your thumb or finger anywhere. You open the app, it sees your face automatically unlocked. It adds that layer of security without inconveniencing you at all. Touch ID isn't bad in any way. It's super fast, super reliable, but it does feel like a step back in a way. But I think with the age of masks, it's not something that people are really going to be complaining about. And performance, man. That has to be the biggest factor of this phone, of why I think it's such a heavy-handed competition with the other phones here, is because of its performance. It's got the A13 and it's got, you know, just unbelievable optimization. There is nothing I threw at this phone that could get it to stutter. There was nothing I could do that made this phone feel slow. I tried, you know, overloading it with stuff, and it barely gets warm. It barely gets hot. The only time when I can get it hot is when I'm fast charging and I'm doing some intensive apps or running, you know, Geekbench or something like that. Like, this phone is super well optimized, and it doesn't get as hot as the OnePlus Nord was getting, and that wasn't getting too hot either. So I mean, this is just, you know, a step above a step. So that's going to be it for what I think I really like about this phone. Let me move on and talk about the things that I don't like as much about it. And right off the bat, I have to talk about the gestures. As I said, swiping back was so nice. I miss swiping up to go home. Like the gestures to swipe through the interface, I've gotten so used to them over the years. I am not a fan of the button anymore. Like pressing a button to go home, it just feels slower for some reason. Double pressing to multitask, not being able to switch between apps by sliding on that bottom bar. It just, you know, that feeling of change is, it's a backward step, as I said. And if you've used a phone with gestures, going to this is going to feel like a step back. And I think that fortunately enough, most people that will be buying this phone are probably on an iPhone 8, 7, or 6, or something even older, so they won't really care. But for anybody that has used something that's a little bit more modernistic, I want to say, in its design and usability, especially with these larger screens with all gesture controls, you're definitely going to feel that being a step back. I definitely miss those gestures a lot, and it makes the flow of the phone feel a little bit more clunky. And another thing that I think is a crime is that, let me grab the phone right here. Any other phone, when you tap the screen now, any modern phone, when you tap the screen turns on. Not on this. You can either raise it to wake it up, or you have to hit the power button. No tapping the screen to turn it on, and that's frustrating because the iPhone XR does it, the iPhone 11 does it, iPhone 11 Pro does it, and this is the only iPhone in the current iPhone lineup that doesn't do it. Every Android phone does it too. They've done so for a while. You tap the screen, it turns on. Doesn't matter if it's LCD, AMOLED, whatever. That hasn't really been a factor anymore. Just tapping the screen turns it on. It doesn't with this, and it feels like, again, a step backward. So if you hadn't used a phone with that feature, you won't miss it. But if you've used a phone with that feature, you're going to miss it a lot, like I am. And it's definitely something that's a big omission. That's stupid. Like, this is a stupid omission that should not be in their place. As I said, the design of this phone, the display, the bezels, it makes the phone feel a lot older than it is. You know, I'm often surprised by the performance, but then I realize this is a 2020 phone. This came out this year, so of course the performance is going to be great. It's just like my mind tricks me into thinking this phone should be a little bit slower because it's old, but the phone isn't old, just the design is old. A very stupid omission also is front camera video recording is super limited. You can only do it at 1080 30 FPS. No 4K, no 60 FPS at all. Bad omission, I think, because iPhones are great with camera. This chip can easily handle it. What I think the issue is that the sensor, the front camera on the iPhone, actually just isn't good enough. That's why Apple probably hasn't put it in. Instead of upgrading the camera, they just removed the feature and haven't given it to you, because the OnePlus Nord can do 4K at 60 FPS on the front camera. So keep that in mind. It is possible for these things to happen. It's just the camera is probably a little bit not up to par with the iPhone there. That's why they had to remove it. And battery life is definitely, as I was talking about at the beginning, while it's okay, it's 100% the weakest link on this phone, and it's what's going to be the thing that deters people from it if you're coming from something like an older Android phone that has a much more massive battery size. Like, while Apple and iOS have a great system with their software implementation and their optimization, you can't, physically substitute a battery. Like, a bigger battery is going to get you better battery life, and Apple has stuck an 1800 milliamp hour battery, which is half the size, like less than half the size of what most of these Android phones have now. So it's just obviously not going to match them in the battery department, and I fear that people are going to have to not choose this phone because of that aspect, right? I think that a lot of potential buyers are going to be scared away because the battery life is definitely a big issue. Even if they're okay with the design, if you can't get through a full day's workload out of it, it becomes an issue. So that's something that Apple should have fixed. They didn't. I really don't know what to say beyond that point. Just think about it, right? The screen on time I'm getting from this is anywhere from 3.5 to 5.5 hours, which is about half of what I got out of the OnePlus, and about a third, okay, not maybe like around a third, right? Just be a little bit more generous with the numbers, but in the neighborhood of a third of what the 11 Pro Max gets. So I can get like 9 to 10 hours of screen on time out of the iPhone 11 Pro Max, but I can barely get 4 to 5 out of this. So it's something to think about. This phone definitely is great when it comes to performance, but just not great when it comes to battery life. So moving on to just wrapping things up, I'm definitely enjoying this phone. I haven't felt like I'm missing anything major going back, just some basic things like the swipe up and the tap to turn on the screen. Those things are okay, but I've gotten used to pretty quickly. The display definitely feels older, but with the performance it has, it sort of makes up for it in a way. There's no looking around it, right? There's no justifying this. They should definitely have done something with the display, but that's where they cut costs, and while I'm not okay with it, I understand why they did it. And getting into more details, I'll talk about those in my full upcoming review. I just want to talk about some nitty-gritty things that I don't think were applicable to a more full review of the phone. So that's it for this one, and also I will definitely cover the camera more extensively in the full review of this phone. That's going to be something very interesting, especially looking at it, comparing it to the iPhone 8 and the OnePlus Nord. I just want to get a little bit more time with this phone before I give you guys my final verdict on it. So if you do want to find more updates on the iPhone SE, I do keep talking about it, and I keep giving battery updates and everything on my social media. So if you haven't already, I'll have all the handles right here on the screen, and of course in the description as well. So go follow me on social media, on Twitter especially, if you want to find out what's going on with the iPhone SE and stuff behind the scenes. And be sure to check out my blog as well. I have a website where I post blogs 2 times a week. That's a great place to also follow me and kind of read what my thoughts are. That's going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.